Hi, I'm Danny Duchamp. Welcome to my shitty Honda Fit.
Hi, I'm Gabe, and I'm a from Sorry. Since I work in media, I can't talk about my identity or lived experience, because apparently that would be divisive.
I don't know exactly what it was you bleeped out there, Gabe, but given the title of your video, I think we can safely assume that it was sexuality, gender, and ethnicity. Am I close? Or at least a set like that. So let me try my intro in the way that you wanted to do yours. Hi, I'm Danny Duchamp. I'm a white, cisgendered, bisexual male New Zealander with Maori and European heritage. That sounded a little weird, didn't it, Gabe? Why did that sound weird? Well, I think that it's because bringing up those facts about myself apropos of nothing calls into question why exactly I felt it necessary to bring up those facts. There's nothing wrong with those aspects of oneself. Humans have a deep need to understand things, though, and when you say something out of nowhere, people want to know why. In my original intro, I said, Hi, I'm Danny Duchamp. Welcome to my shitty Honda Fit. I use that in most of my videos. In fact, when I stopped at one point, people complained. I think that's because they either find it mildly humorous or perhaps a little charming. When you throw out superfluous information like that, people in their minds will instantly search for a reason. And in the case of my vehicle's model, make, and quality, the reason people naturally and quite reasonably come to is that it's intentionally superfluous for the purposes of humor. However, when you throw out your race, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, etc., then, well, since you're clearly not doing it for humorous purposes, or you wouldn't have been had you not bleeped them out, then people naturally tend to assume that it might be because you consider those aspects of yourself to be more important than they really need to be. And given that you describe those fixed genetic aspects of yourself as your
lived experience,
that assessment is sounding pretty reasonable indeed, wouldn't you say? That makes people uncomfortable, because if you consider those aspects of yourself to be determinant of your experiences, it becomes reasonable to worry that you might judge them and assume their experiences by those characteristics. Well, people don't like being judged by things they can't change. Most people want the chance to prove themselves through their actions as an individual, rather than just being lumped in with everyone who happens to share some given characteristic with them. However, your initial premise, the idea that the media in general is averse to making a big deal of race, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, etc., that is a phantasm of your overactive imagination. The media never stops talking about these things, and in fact, the reason that people have gotten so cagey about those rather pedestrian aspects of a person is that the media will not shut up about those things and making them into a far bigger deal than they really need to be.
today we're taking a look at folks that have started using the phrase identity politics to stifle conversation that makes them uncomfortable.
Well, yeah. I mean, being judged for someone else's actions makes people uncomfortable. And so they've developed a term for the kind of rhetoric that's designed to do exactly that. I fail to see the issue.
Here's why they should step out of their bubble of alternative facts.
Ugh, the alternative facts thing. If anyone doesn't know about this particular piece of rhetoric or the incident which caused it, don't bother, it's not worth your time. But, in case that knowledge has already been inflicted upon you, here's a quick word on it. When Conway originally said that phrase, it was an offhand remark for a start, but in addition, it was perfectly reasonable. She wasn't saying facts are different for different people. That's the kind of relativism you only see amongst the far left, cough, cough, standpoint theory, cough, cough. What she was obviously saying was that there are two sides which disagree on what the facts are, also known as every disagreement ever. So mocking her for it is mocking her for dissent. Actually, that's not surprising at all, is it? Anyway, back to identity politics,
And take a look at what's actually dividing our country.
You. And anyone else peddling identity politics. The good thing about this video is that it isn't strawmanning anyone. Yet. It's absolutely the position of most people who use the phrase identity politics that it's dividing every country. Well done, Gabe. You've identified a position that actually exists. You're just fucking wrong about it.
The way we use the phrase identity politics today usually applies to an individual or group focused on a narrow cause, often to their benefit at the exclusion of others.
That's not a terrible definition. It's important to note the difference between movements that want to stop their group from being treated differently because of their identity, and groups that want their group to be treated differently because of their identity. It's the difference between an equal rights movement and a supremacy movement. Equal rights movements are not identity politics. For example, the women's rights movement shouldn't be considered identity politics. They weren't saying, we're women so we deserve special treatment. They were saying, we are women and we don't deserve to be denied the right to vote on that basis. Or similarly, the men's rights movement at the moment aren't saying, we are men so we deserve special treatment. They're saying, we are men and we don't deserve to be denied the right to fair treatment in family courts on that basis. Yeah. No? You say the men's rights movement is identity politics? Oh, and that it's misogyny to boot? Strange, because it seemed fucking identical in intention to the women's rights movement. Okay, I'll draw a different comparison. The African-American civil rights movement, basically the black rights movement, was not identity politics because they weren't saying, we are black and we deserve special treatment. They were saying, we are black and we don't deserve to have our own tax money spent on segregating us into separate and inferior government services on that basis. Or similarly, I support the start of a white rights movement. And I wouldn't want it to say, we're white so we deserve special treatment. I'd want it to say, we're white and we don't deserve to have our own tax money spent on discriminating against us via affirmative action programs on that basis. No again? A white rights movement would be inherently racist, you say. Interesting. You know, I think I might have identified some double standards here. And that's the crux of identity politics. The term is descriptive of those who draw double standards based on identity. It's advocacy not for equal treatment of individuals, but for the interests of one collective over another. In modern times, this is generally used to ignore the rights issues of whichever group is seen as the oppressor class, as though a solution for prejudice in one direction is prejudice back in the other direction, rather than, say, stopping the fucking prejudice. Instead of looking at the various rights issues faced by women and the rights issues faced by men, and working to fix both, they just determine the oppressor class to be one of them, the oppressed class to be the other, and advocate only for the latter, no matter how skewed in their favour the laws get. Same thing with the oppressor white people and oppressed black people, despite the fact that the only discriminatory laws in any Western country do not favour whites, but favour pretty much everyone else. It doesn't matter. It's not about rights issues. It's about, well, identity politics.
Which is funny because it sounds like something racist white people literally invented.
See what I fucking mean. This is how identity politics destroys your ability to think rationally. White people literally invented, well, essentially tribalism. Gabe, monkeys form tribes and defend the interests of their tribe over the others. Every human society in history has had various in-groups and out-groups, various demographics of people claiming that their demographic deserves special treatment for some reason. This behaviour has been termed identity politics. And let me remind you, your video is supposed to be arguing in favour of it.
Like the time they tried to legally count a black person as only a portion of a white person.
Man, I've never understood how this historical stuff is meant to be relevant when trying to quash rights movements right here and now, but I'll give it a go. Is it the older the better? Okay, how about the Ottoman Empire? White Christians forced to pay taxes or just generally being enslaved for being part of the wrong collective. My one's older, so I win. Is that how this works?
Or the time they spent taxpayer dollars on two of everything instead of sharing with people of color.
Or maybe it's more recent that's better, because there are legal rights issues for white people right the fuck now. Yes, in your country, Gabe. I'll post a link to my white rights video in case you doubt it, but in short, it talks about how affirmative action is only ever used in American universities to help non-whites, and how there are even government services, such as the Minority Business Development Agency, that uses everyone's tax money to help the businesses of everyone except white people. Fucked up, right? And if it's recency that is important, that'd actually make more sense to me, by the way. You know, having a rights movement today because of problems that exist today. Maybe that's just me.
Or even the time white nationalist Richard Spencer...
No, I don't care what Richard Spencer said. Nobody had heard of that guy until The Atlantic made him famous, so they could have a spoopy alt-right boogeyman, and the rest of the left-wing media just went along with it. In any case, he's not a good example of people who complain about identity politics because he's explicitly in favour of it.
Examples of white excellence in America seem to necessitate the exclusion or subjugation of anyone who isn't a white guy.
What? I'd never heard the term white excellence before, so I googled it, and no, I don't see how this subjugates anyone. Unless, is white excellence something Spencer said? Yeah, I don't care. When you, Gabe, are talking about Spencer, or the alt-right in general, it's just one identity politician versus another.
But the moment people of color or ethnic minorities start to reclaim these differences and own a culture they've developed under government-sanctioned oppression, suddenly we're the ones hung up on race?
If you have spent your entire life without any governmental racism against you, and so you look through history to find some against, well, not you because you weren't alive, but other people of your race, who no longer even fucking exist, then you use that no longer existent governmental action that never happened to you anyway to justify opposing anyone trying to correct governmental racism against another race happening right now. Then, yes, you are hung up on race. You're not attempting to create a more egalitarian, individualist society. You are carrying on the grudges of semi-arbitrary collectives well beyond the point where they were useful. Which was never. You brought up examples of white people playing identity politics in the past. It was bad, what those white people did. Don't you agree? Right, so why are you so insistent on convincing everyone to keep doing it?
Don't hate the player, hate the game your racist ancestors invented.
I do hate the game, Gabe. That's why I argue we should all stop playing it, unlike you, who have become so utterly mired in the swamp of identity politics, you somehow feel totally justified thinking the oppressive white boogeyman invented it, and yet we should keep playing it. White people have played it in the past, yes, like every other demographic in history, but pretending that means all white people, especially today, hold all the guilt for that unfortunate yet intrinsic element of human nature, well, that's pretty messed up. And then going on to say that this justifies ignoring the actual, demonstrable, systemic racism against whites that I pointed out before, well, that's pretty much the most racist shit I've ever heard.
Apparently, whenever people of color talk about systemic inequality and how it affects their lives day to day, we're playing the race card.
Yes, you are. Unless you can point to the specific system for that systemic inequality. Pointing out actual government agencies, for example, that explicitly discriminate against a specific race would not be playing the race card. Purely as a hypothetical. I don't know where I came up with that. If you can do so, you are not playing the race card. However, if you just say systemic inequality with no more justification than to point to differing outcomes and pretend that the only explanation is discrimination, or in your case just now, without even doing that, you certainly are playing the race card, yes. And identity politics.
But based on the way everyone from members of Congress to Breitbart bloggers have been using the phrase, identity politics has become a safety blanket for alt-right snowflakes.
No, you fucking moron. The alt-right is in favor of identity politics. Explicitly. They will happily tell you that they think we simply can't avoid identity politics. It's too fundamental a part of human nature, so if they have to play, they'll play to win. And if I was convinced of that, I probably would say the same. And I also want you to remember that I use exactly the same arguments against the alt-right that I do against you. That while, yes, humans probably will always play identity politics to some extent, humans will be irrational dicks of all varieties to some extent. The point is to try to be rational and try to be kind anyway. And at the very least, get the identity politics out of the fucking laws.
Eager to lash out at their opponents using phrases like the woman card or the gay agenda when they find themselves unable to debate using science, history, or fact.
Oh, an accusation that I don't use facts from Gabe White's invented racism Gonzalez. I'll be sure to take that super seriously. Especially with all of those zero examples you use to show that we're the ones without facts. Moron.
What the right gets wrong about their identity politics claim is that today's movements for equality are inclusive.
Oh, you mean like the men's rights movement? Yeah, ask any men's rights advocate if they're a women's rights advocate as well, and you'll pretty much get a yes every time. So, yeah, that seems pretty inclusive to me. Is that what you meant?
From the Black Lives Matter movement.
Black Lives Matter is inclusive. Alright, so to provide a fair comparison to my men's rights movement example, if I asked them if white lives matter, they would be inclusive enough to say yes to that too. Hell, even saying all lives matter is going to get me nothing but a flurry of the most heinous accusations they can string together, isn't it?
To the Women's March on Washington.
I hope you don't mean the one from earlier this year. That was an anti-Trump march. It was merely female-themed. It wasn't an equality movement. Which inequality faced by women were they campaigning for, Abortion, or the right to opt out of parenthood once a pregnancy happens. Yeah, so first off, Trump is not threatening that right, just some forms of government funding to them. Primarily the funding to non-US citizens. I don't understand why they were giving that in the first place. But anyway, second of all, and more importantly, until they start advocating that men be able to opt out of parenthood after conception, they're not arguing for equal rights. Now are they? They're advocating for more government money to help women exercise a right that men don't even have. And you call them inclusive.
Centering vulnerable communities in a name has never meant the exclusion of allies.
No, of course. Like I've already touched on, there's nothing wrong with defending a group from rights violations. The Black Lives Matter movement, for example, would be somewhat justified, if poorly named, in principle at least, if the American police were more willing to shoot blacks than whites. But there simply isn't evidence of that. In fact, the only comprehensive study found on the issue suggests quite the opposite, that cops are more willing to shoot whites. The Black Lives Matter movement, for example, relies on the assumption that blacks must have it worse than whites, because a significant portion of the population, unfortunately, thinks in that simplistic identity politics-based way you do, where one collective is simply the oppressor and the other is simply the oppressed, always and forever, no room for individual variance, no variance by issue, and crucially no changes over time. So just claiming cops shoot blacks all willy-nilly doesn't even need any evidence. It just is true. I mean, it just is. Oh, but there's also something that you said at the end of that sentence, Gabe. Let me play it again.
Has never meant the exclusion of allies.
The exclusion of allies? Go on.
Because allies know that equality means first lifting up those who don't share in it equally.
Oh, so that's what you meant by inclusive. You're inclusive of allies. You don't mean that we'll all stand together in defense of, say, everyone including white people. You mean that white people are perfectly welcome to join in, standing up for the rights of everyone except them. Oh, isn't that nice, everyone? We're included. Ah, Gabe.
Can't say the same for the adorable deplorables at a Trump rally who kicked out a black man, assuming the color of his skin made him a protester.
Get him out of here!
Good news, everyone. I think I've found a video of that particular black Trump supporter.
Let's play what they said.
David Duke and people like that, they come out from under the rocks all the time around this time this year. It got nothing to do with Donald Trump. We're all Americans. I think we need to stop with all the racist stuff and the race baiting. Like me and my friend right here, we just met today, we was talking. You know, we got to stop with the racist stuff and this, that. We all Americans, man. And nobody paying David Duke no mind.
Oops. Was that the wrong guy? Easy mistake to make, though. Right, MSNBC? For those who don't know, that clip was accidentally played by MSNBC while trying to slander Trump as racist. It was hilarious. But it does call into question why, despite numerous black Trump supporters, they specifically threw out that one you mentioned. Kinda sounds like maybe it wasn't his race, doesn't it? Well, it turns out, if you check a few articles, there's literally no evidence that he was ejected because of his race. He was called a protester because he walked to the front... Walked to the front? In a Trump rally? Alright, he pushed his way to the front and started yelling at Donald, brandishing a letter asking him to be less racist. Kind of reasonable to assume that guy's a protester. But that's a perfect fucking example of the race card. All these media sources just simply claim it was due to race, zero evidence provided, and therefore it just was. Because it just was, okay? It's this kind of shit that fuels the right-wing resurgence in the first place. Or at least, it's what makes it more authoritarian than I might like. Don't get me wrong, this right-wing resurgence of Trump, Le Pen, Wilders, etc., it's resulted in all of those great candidates, and they're about as far as you can get from being the fascists that leftists think they are. But they're a little more authoritarian than I'd like. And I don't think I'm alone in that. people are willing to live with that to combat people who think like Gabe. And there's some concern that, unless these kinds of social justice-y beliefs stop being so mainstream, that the reaction to them will eventually support a real fascist.
Gotta love that alt-right inclusivity.
The alt-right is not a significant portion of Trump supporters, and in fact is not a significant proportion of anything, and for the last fucking time, the alt-right is not against identity politics, holy shit!
This is why Americans, particularly the white majority in this country, need to hear from people who aren't like them.
And non-white people don't need to hear from white people? I mean, first of all, it's fucking weird that you use the term people who aren't like them to mean people of a different race. I feel I share more in common with a black libertarian who's interested in physics and likes the Mars Volta than with a white communist who's interested in philately and likes Kanye West. But even if we narrow our determination of what people are like to race alone, I'm going to have to point out that there is currently a lot more resistance to a white rights movement than to any other rights movement. Even though white people are on the receiving end of more than their fair share of legal discrimination. This, to me, looks like, despite being a majority, or possibly because of it, white people are the ones whose racial issues society is ignoring.
According to a 1996 study from USC's Annenberg School, television programs can influence the way a viewer feels about groups through a process known as priming.
Well, that sounds mildly Orwellian. This wouldn't be something that's going to totally confirm every claim about the political left controlling the entertainment industry for political reasons, is it? Because when I suggest that, I get called a conspiracy theorist.
Exposure to stereotypes, or counter-stereotypes, can alter that viewer's behavior toward a stereotyped group in an unrelated media event. So, if the stories you consume on screens can influence the way you treat people in the real world, representation and authenticity take on an entirely new urgency.
Alright, first of all, that's a yes to my question, but also, no, representation doesn't become urgent because of that. You're talking about the subtle ways in which people can internalize the art they enjoy. Have you considered that by focusing so hard on racial representation in the media, the idea people will internalize is that what ultimately defines us is race? Actually, you're arguing in favor of identity politics, so maybe, and terrifyingly, you have considered that.
When you call shows like Blackish, or Master of None, or even the One Day at a Time reboot reverse racist,
okay, I'm not even dealing with this point, because it just proves you've never listened to a fucking word from any of the people you're attempting to criticize. Reverse racist? If someone is opposing identity politics, they will laugh heartily in your general direction at the mere idea of reverse racism. It's just called racism, you fucking dolt. For racism against white people to be considered reversed, you need to start from the position that racism is inherently a thing that white people do to non-whites. Which, if you're following, is something you believe, not your opponents. Why are you trying so goddamned hard to get me to play identity politics? How do you think that ends, Gabe? I'm going to go through the last little bit of your video, and if I find one more piece of blatant racism towards white people that you can excuse with your Paleolithic, grudge-based identity politics, I'll tell you how it ends.
don't let racist, mediocre white guys gaslight you into being ashamed of who you are or what you bring to the table.
Gabe, if you convince me, perhaps with some help of the alt-right, to join in this game of identity politics, you know I won't be joining on your side, right? If you convince me that human society can never, or should never, progress any further than a set of bickering racial collectives, I'm not going to start groveling and apologizing for being white. I'm going to crush you beneath my mighty fascist boot heel. And I promise you, I am not the only one. You can keep up this charade where you're against racism until it comes to one specific race. You can keep throwing punches pretending you're not interested in a fight, but at some point, the people you keep pushing will hit their breaking point. And I don't think you want to see that happen. I know I don't. So next time you're thinking about telling white people to join in on the identity politics, maybe think twice. Maybe take another look at egalitarianism or individualism. They might not be as bad as you recall, given the alternatives.